Tiffany Franklin is my guest, and we talk about the disconnect in the job market between job hunters and what the market is looking for. Because everyone hears firms are hiring, but it's kind of like an eighth grade dance, is the metaphor that we use in this interview. The boys are on one side, the girls are on the other side, they don't talk to one another. Well, that's the way the job market feels at some point. And we want to help you get across the room and ask the boy or the girl or the boy or the girl out that you want to ask out. Hope you find this helpful. Hope you enjoy the interview. I did. And now let's get going. So my guest today is Tiffany Franklin. Tiffany is an executive career coach with 20 years of experience specializing in providing career services to a whole host of clients, ranging from senior level Fortune 500 executives and mid-level managers to recent grads and current students, helping those people land with firms like Google or Microsoft or Amazon. She's a former UPenn and Vanderbilt career services person and the host of Job Search Strategies with Tiffany Franklin. Tiffany, welcome. Thanks for making time.
Hi, Jeff. I'm so glad to be here. Thank you. That's quite an intro.
You are very welcome, and you wrote most of it. So here we are toward the end of 2021, and it is a pretty strange job market, to say the least. You know, there's been the talk about the Great Resignation and firms finding it difficult to find people, but job hunters, finding it difficult to find work too. Like, how does this disconnect occur? Like, what are you seeing, or is it just my imagination that it's kind of disconnected?
Oh, Jeff, you are so right about that. I've never seen anything like it in 20 years. It really reminds me of an eighth grade dance. On one side, you've got the job seekers who they want quality jobs. And then on the other side, you have the employers who say they can't find people. And what it's leading to is frustration all around. And what I think that's really stemming from is there's so many of these applicant tracking systems, that software that parses through the resume that these companies use because they had so many applications. So they have to figure out some way to weed through them. The problem is the way that the software is set up, it weeds out a lot of the good candidates. And then another thing about it is I think the pandemic just changed everything. People suddenly they were kind of forced into reevaluating their lives and thinking about what's important to them. And for years, maybe they had longed for some flexibility and the employer said, no, we can't do that. We haven't done that before. And then when the world had to, they were forced into it. And it may have been messy and complicated, but it happened for a lot of people. It depends on the industry, of course. Many people had no choice in service industries, and that's a whole other thing. So I think in the one sector you had where people now they're demanding flexibility, knowing that it can be done. And then in the service sector, people are saying, we deserve to be, or just across the board, we deserve to be treated better. We want to be paid fairly. And there are other options out there.
Yeah, and service sector, I know a little something about, because I've had friends who've been executive chefs and in some great restaurants, and my son has worked in restaurants as well. And a lot of people found other jobs. It's really that simple. They couldn't sit around collecting unemployment. And as nice as it was to collect $600 a week, when you're in big cities, that doesn't really cover a heck of a lot. Like, in my son's case, his rent was $1,600 a month for a studio apartment. So,
oh, yeah. I lived in the city for years. I think that's the thing. The cost of everything was going up, but salaries weren't commensurate with that. And many people were relying on maybe multiple gig economy. They had their full-time job. They may have had a secondary job. And then suddenly when you realized, well, I don't have to be so tied to a city to work for some of these great companies. So why don't I go somewhere where the cost of living is cheaper? And it opened up a world of possibilities, even though it was in the context of a very traumatic thing for the whole world.
And you brought up a great metaphor with the eighth grade dance. One gender's on one side, the other group is on the other side, and they talk to one another, and there's not a lot of connection in there. So what can people do in order to, get more interviews, since it's often the system that's getting in the way?
Exactly. And that's what I see with so many of my clients. They have so much to offer and they really want to work. In fact, many of them, they're either working in jobs that they just don't feel valued, or it's just not, they've outgrown them and there's nowhere to go from there. So when they start to apply, what happens is they need to tailor their resume to each job to which they apply. So I think it's easiest to almost think about this like an upside down pyramid, where maybe you pick a few areas that, okay, say I've been doing account management or the industry that I'm in, maybe that's something that would be easier to get, but this is a step up because you really don't want to be applying to jobs that you're completely qualified for. You want to be challenging yourself and spreading your wings, building new skills. So then you may have another industry or type of job title. Maybe you're looking into more leadership roles, and then you have maybe another one or two industries. So what you do is pick your resume and have a general one for each of those industries or funnels, if you will. And then, so it's still you, but it's the language you use. So for instance, in your resume with the job that you're doing now, you're talking about exactly what you do on a daily basis. But for the one where you're trying to show leadership, maybe you're taking more of those projects that you've been doing where you weren't technically a supervisor, but you were leading the project, and demonstrate that. Show it in your volunteer experience. Show it across context. I think sometimes people get so caught up on titles. There's a lot of ways to show leadership besides just having a manager title. The other thing is then there's this great site I love, jobscan.co, and it emulates the applicant tracking systems. So what you can do for that site is paste your resume, paste the job description, and then go through and it'll show you what percentage match. And don't be discouraged, even for a completely optimized resume. At first, it may come out to be like a 20% match and you're trying to get to an 80% match. But what it gives you, you put in the URL of the job and the company name, they'll tell you what ATS it is. So for instance, like Workday or Greenhouse or any one of those, it can tell you the nuances. Many people on their resumes, they just put the year, they don't put months. That really counts off on the applicant tracking systems. Also, if you're not quantifying, I know from when I was a recruiter, I would see that a lot. So those are some things.
I'm going to interrupt you there because that's a perfect spot for me to point out one thing to the viewers/listeners, and that is, without months in your resume, it gives the reader or the system the sense that there's a gap in there that's unexplained. There may not be one, but if you don't have that in there, I know when I did search, I was trained to believe, what are they hiding? What don't they want me to know that causes them not to include the months? What's the gap? Because, like, for example, if your resume says 2019 to 2021, and we're now in 2022 or 2023, were you laid off in January of 21 or in December? There's a big, gap in there, and recruiters are trained to believe that you guys are trying to trick them, and that there's a huge gap in there. And you know why we're trained that way? Because many of you did try and trick us. It's really that simple. So we wind up being untrusting in so much of what we do. So recognize, like, months may seem like a small thing, but it's a bigger thing than you imagine. So include them unless you are trying to hide that.
Well, and the thing where people often would get messed up was they were talking about an award or the sales figures for, fiscal year 2020 or something. And so it wasn't even in the context of their job dates, but the system didn't know that. So that's why my rule for, or your volunteer experience. So my rule for all my clients is no lonely years. They must all have a month by them.
Lonely years?
We don't want lonely years in any context.
Sitting by the phone waiting. Oh, lonely years.
Exactly. Lonely no more, So, and the other thing, without the quantification, people say, you actually want me to put numbers on my resume? And I say, yes. When I was a recruiter, and I've spent most of my career as a career coach. So job seekers, I eat, sleep, and breathe helping them get jobs. But I'm glad I got to work on the other side for a bit because I was curious, that 39-year-old crisis, let me try something different. And also it got me to be a better coach because now I see the perspective of the recruiter, how inundated you are with resumes. But people would say the same thing over and over on their resumes, and there was no context. Where the ones that they put the numbers, it helps me. Okay, so did you spearhead a global team of 10 across 3 continents? And how did you improve sales? So if you can ever say how much, how many, how often, it can be in terms, sales and revenue is great, money saved, project budgets, did you work on 10 projects ranging from budgets of 50K to 2 million? And they don't always have to be astronomical numbers either. You can even, if you find that your job is not as quantifiable as you would like, then you can look at, describe your company, how many clients or how many people are on your team or how big of a company is it, and little things like that. It's still, the applicant tracking system doesn't know, well, this number is in this context, it just sees a number. So that's helpful.
Business is the language, I'm going to interrupt. Business is the language of numbers. And thus, I did work in technology recruiting for much of my career. And what I would say to people is there's a difference between a system that is $20,000 versus 200 versus 2 million versus 20 million versus 200 million versus 2 billion. And unless you tell people what it is, they don't know. As such, the firm that is hiring the 2 million isn't going to be interested in the 2 billion person because they're going to see that that's a step down. You're going to be bored and disinterested, and thus they're going to delete. But make it easy for them to find out what they want about you. Withholding it because you're not sure, just put it out there.
Exactly.
If it's the right numbers, it'll be the right numbers. If it isn't, what will happen is you'll go on an interview and waste everyone's time. It's really that simple.
Exactly. I mean, no one job determines your destiny or your future. You're trying to find the right fit. So I think some things to keep in mind are also, if you have any non-disclosure agreements, be careful what you put on your resume. And also some people may put more on the resume, but less on LinkedIn because it's a very public facing. So be aware of that, just as you are non-competes and all that. I mean, those are important things as a job seeker. Another thing is with, people, they forget what they've done. So I encourage all of my clients once a month, just maybe it's a running notes thing on your phone or something, put down what are your wins for that month. That way, when you go to do your resume again, which I hope people are updating it every 6 months or once a year, because you never know, even for internal opportunities, you may need it, but you'll remember what you did. Because otherwise you just get so busy in the day-to-day doing stuff that then I can't tell you how many clients after I do the resume, they'll come back and say, oh, I forgot this, Tiff, I forgot that. And then we'll weave it back in.
And for the internal situation, one of the classic scenarios is your boss leaves and now you're about to be reviewed by someone who really doesn't know your work. And having worked with so many people over the years who suddenly stress out at that moment, and understandably, because they know this is their first meeting with their boss and it's a review no less. And they have to deliver in that meeting to give a sense of scope, impact, results achieved, and what have you. Isn't it a lot easier to have an extemporaneous running tally of these things? Money saved, money earned, percentage improvement over what existed there previously, your wins, some of the rough areas, so that you're not blindsided by them in the meeting, because they're talking to people who you interact with. And trust me, those always show up. So you might as well record them as well so that you're prepared to talk about them. So a lot of good stuff Tiffany's throwing out so far as we try and get the two sides to dance with one another.
Well, thank you, Jeff. I love that. And a good way that people can do it is go back through their performance reviews, because usually, I mean, some of it's very lengthy, but usually there's a summary and, goals for the next year. What are the highlights and what are the areas of improvement, just like Jeff mentioned. And that way you can ask yourself, what professional development am I doing? Because I think a lot of people, they think, once school's over, okay, that's my learning. But we should always be learning, always be developing ourselves and looking for areas to make ourselves more competitive, and also just to open up choices for ourselves. I like to ask myself the question, what can I do now that will give me more choices next year, or opportunities, or it's setting yourself up for serendipity. And so part of that is, make sure for those areas or blind spots that, like Jeff mentioned, go through and think, what can I do for that? Does your company offer professional development sessions? There's so many online through Coursera or Udemy, or many other areas where LinkedIn Learning is great too. And you can put that on your resume. That's one section that's often underutilized, is professional development. And it can be both formal, informal, the name of the course, and then who was the agency or online thing that you did, just to show you're building those skills. And then not only put them there, but then in the context of the resume. One thing that I sometimes do, it depends on the resume, is by your bullets, you could even put the keyword leadership and then show the leadership bullet. Then you could have maybe data analytics. So that way we're naturally weaving in some of those keywords, while also it breaks up some of the text in the bullets. Other tips for your resume: make sure you don't weave or basically condense all your positions into one. If you're at a company for 10 years, I want to see how you've grown. So I don't want just 4 job titles smushed together and a 10-year block. I want to see, every 2 or 3 or how many years. And I realize some companies are flatter than others, and it's not always a opportunity for you. But if you can, definitely distinguish those, because then I can see your growth and what you've been doing along the way.
And even LinkedIn, in the way they set up information that you provide about your current employer and previous ones, has that kind of a breakup that Tiffany's talking about, where you can first demonstrate you were at this level, and then the next role that you had, and its role and responsibilities and your accomplishments, on and on and on. So if you've been at a firm for 10 years, 10 years!
I know, oh my gosh, that actually happens?
So rare these days. When I started in search, that was pretty normal. And they looked at the people with 2 years of experiences. What's wrong with this job hopper? And that was 2 years. These days we go, thank God, 2 years.
Yeah, boy, they're an old timer.
Exactly right. And I also want to bring up one other thing about the applicant tracking system, because I'm never a big fan of applying that way. I believe that you try and cut the line wherever you can through networking or using the side door to get yourself in. But one thing I just want to point out to folks is job descriptions are 80% accurate. And thus the people who are creating the nuances for how a resume is selected by the system, they're working off the job description most of the time. And the 80% accurate part of this, they don't know which 20% is less accurate than others. And thus, when you're seeing the job description that you're applying to, you don't know. You're just trying to hit the keywords. You don't know where to emphasize. It may emphasize one thing to you, and employers, no one's ever updated the job description.
So true.
So the result winds up being you may be aiming at the wrong target. So if you can cut the line and get to someone in the group, get to the hiring manager, just to confirm what it is that you want, they want before you apply, you can tailor that resume even more tightly for what's being sought, so that this way you're not aiming at the wrong target. You're letting them know what you've done that relates to what they're really looking for.
Well, Jeff, that brings me, that's such a great segue to the 8th grade dance thing, where, let's put the human element back in this. Let's help people come to the middle. And part of that is the networking, because really, I think a job search, it's, half networking, half just applying. And I mean, you could say 80% networking, but, I think it's both. It really just depends. I've been working 20 years, half my jobs I've gotten through networking. So I've accidentally networking. I didn't realize that's what I was doing. I was just talking to people like from my small group in grad school. And then they said, oh, I'll pass this along. And then it worked. And then later I went and actually applied and I thought, oh, this is harder. And I actually am trained in this. But it ended up working out. The thing about it is, think about, okay, who do you know in your circles? And then who do they know? So first you have to be able to articulate the value you deliver. And I think when it comes down to it, what are most employers looking for? Can you do the job? Are you motivated to do the job? And would we want to do the job with you? For the last one, just be yourself. Be your best self, but be yourself with that. The others, so if you're going to talk to people, don't say, I'll do anything anywhere, because what do they do with that? I think a lot of it, you have to have some empathy here and think about if people are coming to you, asking you to help them get a job, you have to be able to guide them a little bit in what you have to deliver and what you're looking for. So that's a lot what I do with my clients, is helping them articulate the value they deliver, and then also exploring to think about what have they done in the past that they want to do, what haven't they done that they want to learn to do, and where are some directions that they can go, and then looking at who do they know. And don't underestimate the value of your alumni network from your schools. So if you just go into your university page on LinkedIn and then click on alumni, you can look at where everybody's going. And this is a time suck, but it's a lot of fun, because basically you can put in like a company name and see all the people from that company who went to your university. You can see people who live in your city. You could even just put, Python if you're a coder, and see other people who have Python on their profile. And for these people that you don't know, of course, you're not going to say, hey, can you give me a job? But you can reach out. And if you want to talk to 2 people, you may have to reach out to 8 or 10, and hopefully they'll get back to you for maybe a 10-minute chat. And I love to ask people, could you tell me a little bit about your experience? People love talking about themselves. They'll think it's the best conversation all day. Let them know some of the stuff you're doing, what maybe you're considering a jump, but you'd like to hear, what do they like about their job? What don't they? Or asking about the culture of a company. That's not something that's as easy to research as some other more objective things. So you can get a few different opinions. Because when you're reaching out to people, you don't know how well suited they are to their own jobs. They could be completely disgruntled, talk to them, and then talk to somebody else at the company who loves it. And you're like, I'm confused.
I want to make sure people didn't miss this little nugget that you had. And that is, you may reach out to 8 people and 2 get back to you. And most people have that hope, that desire, that crave. Why aren't they getting back to me? And they feel terrible. But there's a certain, one of the dirty little secrets of LinkedIn is that people don't get back unless they're on there all the time because they're looking. So don't have an unreasonable expectation of reply. Just reach out to folks. Don't worry about responses unless you're not sure about the letter that you wrote or the message that you're sending. Get some input from Tiffany or I about what you're putting out, and thus you can have the security of knowing that this is the best message that you could put out. Because again, they're not always on there like you are, trying to find a job. They're doing their job. And their configuration for privacy settings may not send them messages when they receive one. They may be sitting in a huge queue waiting for the next time they log on, which could be a year later. So there's a numbers game to this.
Oh, so true, Jeff. I have 2 theories on this. The first is it's the first pancake theory. When you think about when you make pancakes, oftentimes that first one leaves a little something to be desired. So you throw it away, or you go, the dog gets it, you go on to the next thing. So when you're doing first messages, I mean, I want to put my all into that networking message and to my resume and application, but a lot of times the first few, you just don't hear anything. And so I think it's setting yourself up to know that some rejection is going to be part of this process. It does not say anything about who you are as a person, but it's what you do with that. So try that. So that's the second theory is, companies are always using data analytics to drive their decision making. And I think we can use elements of that where we still keep it in the human element, but we try and learn from the process. And that's where, I always say I help people with an efficient and effective search. And some people can feel busy or frenetic. I'm sending out 100 applications this month. And then I talk to them a month later, because they're like, oh, I'll maybe get a career coach later. I just don't think I need one. I'm really busy. And the thing is, I don't want you to be busy. I want you to be strategic. And if we go back and look, they're just doing the LinkedIn easy apply, which sometimes that's great. But, if it's a big company and they're going into the applicant tracking system, they're just going into the black hole. They're not trying to talk to any people or find any people in the community. So what we need to do is look at all the applications you're sending out, look at the effort. Did you use a cover letter? Did you tailor your resume? Did you try the ATS? Did you reach out to some people? And then after a month, maybe I like to say, if it's possible, do an application a day. You can give some good effort to that, but it's not so overwhelming. And then look at it. Which ones did you get preliminary nibbles? Meaning, did you get an email back wanting you to take a test or do a hire view, or some type of contact from them that indicated you were going forward? And then do more of that, because that may be working. Look for patterns. So those are all some things that I think can be helpful. And another thing is to keep your confidence. This can be a very tough process. So I always encourage clients to write down their 5 greatest hits. And they don't have to all be professional, although I definitely want some to be, but what are things that they're most proud of, when they felt most effective? Really go back and look at those things through the lows in your process, so you remember how much you have to give, and look at also the highs and lows in your life. And when you had the lows before, look at what came after. And when you were in that low, you didn't know what the high was to come. And so give yourself time and realize that it's not always going to feel like this. And if you just keep working, something will happen, but keep learning through that process.
And going back to the metaphor of the 8th grade dance, so much of job hunting is like dating. And thus, you may get a phone call from a firm and you remember the job and you go, I'm not sure I'm really interested in that, and then don't return the call. Go out on the first date. It doesn't commit you to anything, but you get a clearer picture about what they're like, what they're looking for, and thus can make a smarter decision about whether to pursue something. Like in dating, your first impressions may be correct, a lot of times may be correct, but then there are those times where it isn't. And you may have closed the door on someone or something that is an opportunity that you really would have been excited about, because that job description wasn't accurate. So go out on that first date, and if you decide not to go out with them again, don't ghost them.
Exactly. Ghosting shouldn't be for anybody. I think the thing to think about this too is, as you're going through, how are they treating you? Because sometimes you may be really excited about a company. It's like, have you ever met someone in dating that on paper, they are the perfect person for you, but then you go out on a date and there's just not that chemistry or that it factor. Either your conversation is not there. And sometimes there may be a company that everybody wants to work at, and then you realize, I don't know that this is right for me. So and I think that's what's exciting right now. If you as a job seeker, you're networking, you're tailoring your resume, there are more opportunities out there if you know how to harness them. And then as you go through, look at how they're treating you, the job seeker, during the process, because I think you can see, are they taking it seriously? And that can give you some clues as you decide if this is a fit for you.
And I'm going to interject now. the recruiter in the process who may not be communicating with you because their client isn't. And they're tired of saying to you, I'll let you know when I hear something, because the more they say that, the more you become annoyed at their client. And they'd rather take the hit rather than the client take the hit, because sometimes the client is going to come back to them in 3 more weeks and say, she's the one, I want to hire her, and they have to deliver you. So just remember, recruiters are the messenger of each other's lies. And I say it that way because you're posturing to make yourself look good, and employers are too. And the recruiter stuck in the middle is the messenger between the two of you. Sometimes your anxiety would be a turnoff to the employer. Sometimes their behavior would be a turnoff to you. The good recruiter is going to do the dance between the parties. The bad recruiters are just going to lie. That's a different conversation. But when you're working with a recruiter, you might just simply say to them at certain points, hey, look, I can handle no. What's harder for me to handle is limbo. Am I really in limbo? Or is this just you don't want to tell me no? I promise not to argue.
I just want to know. Like dating again, it's like, don't ghost me. Just tell me if we're not a fit. I think the thing that's interesting about that too is it all depends on where in the hiring process you come through. I was so skewed. My first job was in '98. I had just graduated from grad school. And here they interviewed. Now, granted, the job market was amazing that time. I was very lucky. But it was, I remember August 28th, I interviewed. And then I found out that Monday that I got the job and I started a week later. And that was through some networking. But also, I was the very last one that they interviewed. And they were making a decision. Then, fast forward back to 2006 when I was going for my Vanderbilt job. I was one of the first people who applied. I didn't even hear back for 2 months that I got the interview. And then the interview was, a call a month later, then another thing, a call. Now, academia can take a little while with their searches. And then I finally got that job. So it was 4 months in. And I found out that, the departments were going back and forth about what the job was like, who was paying for the job. Also in job interviews, sometimes getting people together to do the interview is much harder than anything, or a meeting is harder than anything you talk about in the meeting. So if there are other candidates that they are seeing, you may not hear from them for, like you're saying, Jeff, for a week or two, because they're waiting to interview the other people and then make their decision. So that's why you want to diversify and have a lot of leads going at any given time. I mean, of course, you'll have the ones that naturally come to the top and you really hope they work out, you network, you do your best. But just know there's so many confounding variables that it doesn't mean that they don't like you if you don't hear back the next day. It's just patience,
And it's hard.
It is.
Everyone understands that, especially those of us who are not involved in the interviewing process. We're there trying to advise people through it. And it is hard. I get that. But our goal is to get the other person to walk across the room and ask us out onto the dance floor. And that's our launch point. And once we get them to ask us out on the dance floor, then you have to perform on an interview. Tiffany and I'm sure have lots of information about interview. I know I do, and courses and all that sort of stuff to help you. But today we're just trying to get you to get someone to walk across and ask you to dance.
Thinking of that 8th grade dance, so, you've got the job seekers on the one side, the employers on the other. Think about what things could help you. So if I'm going to let's just dig into this metaphor. So what if I'm in yearbook with somebody? I'll be playing a sport with somebody across the room. We'll be much more likely, if we have known each other in other contexts, to say, oh, wait, yeah, I know him from this and let's talk. And, it doesn't have to be oh my gosh, this is the person I'm going to marry. We're in 8th grade. It's just going to be, let's have a conversation. So for you, what that could look like is maybe going to a conference. Say you're in tech, if you can, many of these are online right now, but if there's a conference or if there's a group in town, get to know the technology people in your town. It can be great networking. Maybe it's just Chamber of Commerce. But as you go to find out where some of these decision makers are, and of course, do your research, find out who's going to be there, go for the learning. But then some of the great networking, you may talk to somebody who's working at Google and maybe they're in a completely different department, but you'll just start to talk to them. Or maybe there'll be a competition or something that you can start to get your foot in the door. You may end up networking for a job you take 5 years later or 2 years later. And I know you're like, but I need something now. Well, we can talk about other things to help you get something now, but thinking about long term, it's what are we doing in our professional development in this moment, and things that, even for my podcast, I've ended up with guests that I worked with 15 years ago, and it was great to, see where they've been, and we've caught up through the years.
And if you're networking online, let's say at a conference, one thing you can do is send a private message in chat and say, I'd love to talk with you. Can I get an email address or a phone number where we could set up a time that's mutually convenient to speak? I'd like to get some advice from you about fill in the blank. And that becomes an easy way to create a networking opportunity, all because you went to a conference. And Tiffany, I know that you and I can go on for at least another half hour, at least, but we have a limited amount of time. What haven't we covered yet that we really should?
Let's see, I'm trying to think in terms of, do you want to talk a little bit about what some of the employers can do to put the human aspect?
No, I want the job.
Let them figure it out. Okay, I'm thinking of networking for people who are, I think networking, that word is one of the most reviled ones because people are like, I hate it. It feels so phony. So maybe how people can keep their authenticity through networking and ways to do it if they don't feel like they're completely extroverted.
And that's a great topic. So how can they do that? How can you be authentic in having a conversation with an absolute stranger?
I think it comes down to expectation management. Don't look at any one person as the person who's going to get you your job. Look at everybody as little breadcrumbs or puzzle pieces where you get to connect with another human, which in these days it's really nice. And, maybe learn a little bit. Really, I think be interested in people, if you really want to learn about them, and where it's not like you're interviewing them or an interrogation, but, maybe it's funny in some of my podcasts, when we talk about interviewing, people jokingly talk about the buffet line. Now, I think buffets may be pretty scarce now with the pandemic, but, just thinking of where by the water cooler or online, just talking to people and find out what they're interested in. If you're looking for something, so maybe find out their experience about the company. I had talked about, how would they describe the culture? What do they like about this industry? Or get people's takes on, given everything that's happened, where do you think this industry is going? There's not a right or wrong answer to it because it's the future. People don't know, but you can get their insights. And then the more you talk to these people and find out if you can connect them. I think the thing with networking is people look at it too much as what can people do for me? Whereas if you look at it in terms of this is a conversation and is there anybody I can connect them with? Because oftentimes when I'm talking to somebody, I'll say, it reminds me, I just talked to somebody last week. I think you guys should connect. And then you can do a little, see if they're okay with that, do an introduction email. Maybe it won't go anywhere, but you never know how people can help each other. And then they'll remember you for helping them. So that way, at least it doesn't feel so transactional. And then follow up. So if you're at a conference, take some notes on who you talk to. So when I used to get business cards, I'd write a few keywords about what we talked about. Or if you're online, just put a few notes and then send a note afterwards. It was so great meeting you. I really enjoyed talking about so-and-so. If they tell you to do something which could be helpful, like you should reach out to so-and-so, or you should do this, do that and let them know you appreciate it. Ask them if there's any, let me know if there's any way I can ever help you, or just little things. It doesn't have to be huge.
So true. There's a speaker many years ago named Zig Ziglar, great name. He used to sell pots and pans door to door in the Ozarks before he became a sales trainer. Really sweet guy. And one of his famous lines is, you can get everything you want in life by helping someone else get what they want in life.
Oh, so true.
And thus, folks, don't make it about me. Make it about the other person. And you'll also learn some things that are useful for you. Stay in touch, because it does make a difference. And that staying in touch isn't about every day, every week, every other week. It what seems to be natural in the relationship, but don't let it drop.
Yeah, and you can put stuff on your calendar. So for instance, maybe it's once every 2 months, 2.5 months, beginning of the academic year. Then it could be, oh, happy Thanksgiving. I hope things have been going well for you, or just wanted to check in, something natural around it. Jeff, there's also one other thing that comes to mind with the job seekers. And I think two things. It's with contract work. For people who have done contract work, put it on your resume. If you just have a 3-month thing and it was contract, put it on after the job title, put contract in parentheses, so people know that it had a definite beginning and end. So that way they don't think it just didn't work out and you were out of there in 3 months, that it was meant to be a structured 3-month. And also don't underestimate the value of contract work, because sometimes people, when they're trying to get a job and it's taking a while, they think, oh, I would never want to do it. And I mean, there are good and pros and cons to it, but I think, depending on where you go, you could get benefits too. And it could be a great way to, it's like an adult internship, it could be a way to test something out for a while, build up some skills, and at least not have that, completely out of work time on your resume. So it's one of many things that if you need to get something quicker, it may be an option.
Absolutely true. Tiffany, this has been fun. How can people find out more about you and the work that you do?
Oh, thank you so much, Jeff. I really enjoy being here. My website is tjfcareercoach.com, and they can find me also on Job Search Strategies with Tiffany Franklin. I write resumes for people. I do interview prep, job search strategy, and just anything that they need for the job search. I'm here for that. And they can go on my website and book, if they want, a complimentary 20-minute consultation to see if we'd be a fit together and I can help them.
Super. Tiffany, thank you. And folks, we'll be back soon with more. I'm Jeff Altman, the Big Game Hunter. You can visit my site as well at thebiggamehunter.us. The blog has a ton of information that you can watch, listen to, or read that will help you with job search, hiring more effectively, management leadership, and helping you resolve workplace issues. For coaching, you can schedule time for a free discovery call or schedule time for coaching. I'd love to help. The site also has information about courses I have, which is a low-cost way of learning a lot of things from me. So again, that site is thebiggamehunter.us. Lastly, connect with me on LinkedIn, linkedin.com/in/thebiggamehunter. Hope you have a terrific day, and best of all, be great.
Thanks, Jeff, for all you do.
Thank you, Tiff. Be great, folks.